all the years that I had my business, there was one message that I heard pretty constantly, even if it wasn't like overt. And it was that eventually you're going to make a ton of money. Everybody's going to want to hire you or buy your stuff and you'll be successful. Or you're going to give up, quit, get muscled out, and you'll fail. So those were your only two options. If you owned a business, there was no third option. And once I started in entrepreneurship, then I really felt like I had very little choice but to stay on that train, because now I was already on and I can't quit. So I have to be successful, right? Don't want to be a failure. So I enjoyed entrepreneurship. And so even though I heard those messages, they didn't really apply to me actively. So I heard them and they kind of stuck in the back of my mind. And the truth is that even though I actually didn't believe those things, like me personally, if somebody quit their business, I would be like, oh, wow, what are you doing next, right? What's happening with you? But I internalized those messages for myself. Even though I was doing fine in my business, the clients kept coming, all was well. So I didn't really need to think about it too much in terms of how it applied to real life, as much as just hearing those messages and thinking, God, that message sucks. Now, that remained that way until a couple of years ago. And during that time, I started to have a feeling coming from spirit that I needed to make a change. And it's likely that you felt this at some point in your life as well, where you hear an inner voice telling you that you need to do something or guiding you in some way so that you can almost feel the direction that you're supposed to be going. And you're like, yeah, okay, I don't know exactly what it is, but I know that it's something different. And it's just a feeling, but it's nothing like super concrete. Now, if you're like I was last year, you ignore it, right? Because first of all, that change, usually in your mind, it means you need to do something else. And that's terrifying. Like, oh my God, it's the opposite of what I'm doing now. And what if I fail? And there's so many other thoughts that happen in that moment. So you ignore it. And so it's not even really there. And the other thing to consider is if I actually make the change, like let's say there is a change and you actually listen to the voice and say, oh, what are you saying, voice? It might say, oh, do something like close your business or whatever. And that's terrifying, because then suddenly you have to deal with all of those messages that have been in the back of your mind that, well, if you aren't succeeding, then you're failing. So if you decide to do something else, then you're failing, right? And so since that was my option, nope, I'm clearly not feeling anything from spirit. I'm not sensing anything. Everything's fine. I'm fine. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. And I did that for a while. And that was interesting, where I was like hearing and feeling the guide that I needed to do something else, but not really listening, right? So then after a while, spirit gets very insistent. So spirit doesn't let you ignore that voice for a while. Now, whatever you call it, it might be, if you're very religious, it might be your inner voice, God, whatever it is, there's some inner compass that is telling you this, right? And it's very insistent. So if you don't listen, it'll keep talking. And then it gets louder, and it kept whispering until it had a very loud voice. And it said to me, you need to shut your business down and you need to go into corporate for a little while. You need to go hang out in corporate. And I was like, yeah, okay. Are you insane? Close down my business. I spent years developing this business. I nurtured it. I grew my relationships. I grew my network. Why would I want to close this business down? Plus, remember, I'm not a quitter. And if I close my business down, right, then that means I've failed, and it can only mean that I've quit. So absolutely not. Why would I do that? So no. And so I basically it was almost like a question. It's like, why on earth would I close my business down? And I was actually really surprised at how easily the answer came to me. And it was that I was tired of marketing. I don't really enjoy the process of marketing. I don't want to be on social media. I don't want to come up with funnels and nurture and convert people. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. So it's not like I find it distasteful and like, ooh, tacky. It's really more just I don't enjoy the process of doing it for myself. Like there's some people who like absolutely thrive on that and they really enjoy it. And the whole process of doing all of that is exciting to them. I didn't want to do it at all. And I didn't even want to think about it. So, it's not like I was like, oh yeah, I can outsource this, because I did. I just wasn't interested in it being a part of my life at that time. And, so that was my first answer, was that I really just didn't want to do those things anymore. And I wasn't taking any joy out of my life. I was doing the things. It was fine, but I just wasn't enjoying it. And then the second answer, and that was actually a really interesting answer because it didn't come until much later. I hired a coach named Maria Milagros. She's amazing, out of Fitchburg, Mass. And if you've heard her speak, or if you have a chance to hear her speak, I strongly recommend it. And so I did a couple of packages with her while we were trying to work through some of these issues and kind of find direction for my life. Um, no small task. And she told me this story, right, about how one day she was cooking chicken, and she puts the chicken in the oven. It's roasted chicken, and in about 10 minutes she's hungry, right, and she wants to eat the chicken, but the chicken isn't ready yet, right? So you can't just pull out the chicken then and eat it just because you want to. Like, the chicken has to cook in however long it takes to cook, and sometimes what the chicken needs to cook is just to be in the oven without you or me doing anything with it. It just stays in the oven, it does its thing, you pull it out after an hour, and oh my god, it's delicious, right? So when I was talking with Maria and she told me this story, I realized that I had an idea for what I wanted to do in the world, right? And I'd gone on a whole journey. I'd built a couple of businesses and transition. It was fun. It was a huge joy, so much fun. And I had gotten my business and my philosophy and where I wanted to go with that, like, as far as I could get it in that space and time, right? It's almost like I seared my business, right? I seared it, and now it's got like that delicious outer coating. And then it needed time to cook. But what it needed from me while it was cooking was my absence. It needed me to not be actively messing around with it, right? And now, when she told me that, everything suddenly made sense to me. And I'm like, oh, I understand what I'm doing. Even though I didn't really understand it, like, where is it going? I do now. It's been a while now. So we're now about 5 or 6 months beyond it, right? And I've figured out a lot more since then, right? So, but at the time, when I first started to understand that this is what was happening, I was immediately afraid, because I was like, what are people going to think about me? What about all the people in my community? What about, and then I stopped and I realized, my God, every single question that I'm asking about what about has nothing to do with me. It has to do with everybody else. Not a single question that I asked myself was, what is right for me? All of my questioning was about what other people would think, and the biggest thing was that I was worried about was everybody would think I was wrong, and that in the recesses of their mind they'd be like, wow, that's a really dumb decision they're making, or oh my god, they clearly couldn't hack it, or oh, did you hear about Manessa, they closed down their business, right? And like almost like pitying me, and I didn't want, like, that made me mad, and nobody was doing any of these things. This is all happening in my head, right? But those were the things that I was worried about. And, there is the group of people that they have an idea of how they think things should be done. So, like, if you say that you're closing down your business, they automatically jump into ideas of, oh, there's this mindset issue or that mindset issue, or this is how things are supposed to be done, or whatever. Everybody has their own story. And there's always those coaches who also, like, they're like, oh, that person couldn't hack it, they quit, right? There's people who absolutely say that, and it's a bad attitude to have, but we know that people have it. And these were all the thoughts that were going through my mind. And so obviously I'm now starting to realize that there's something else that I need to do, but I'm dealing with all of these conditioned ideas, right? So these competing ideas are in my head of what's right for me versus what's out there, what the world has told me I'm supposed to be doing to show up as a successful person, right? So I had at that time really bought into this idea that there are only two options to everything. Either you succeed or be a quitter. I didn't even though I'm all about the third option, and I have been for like years, it didn't occur to me to apply it to this situation and say, okay, maybe there's a third option, one that defies the prevailing wisdom and says that, okay, I'm just taking another step in my life. It doesn't have to be qualified as a success or a failure. It can just be a thing that I'm doing, right? Like, why does it have to have that connotation attached to it? But still, in the immediate moment, I wasn't actually thinking about that wisdom. I was actually thinking about how worried I was about making the wrong choice, because the fact is that is the prevailing wisdom. And because my entire life, much like the life of any socialized woman, is characterized by a constant underpinning of self-doubt, because of how we're conditioned, right? Constantly doubting ourselves because we're conditioned to doubt ourselves. Women are taught that we should never be seen as boastful, assertive, or prideful. Their role, our role, right, the people who are socialized as women, is to be modest and reserved and deferential. It's okay, whatever you need, I'm here. We're also taught to always be looking out for other people's needs. Like, what do they need? Our responsibility is to make sure that everybody else is taken care of, which is why when I first started having this thought, my thought was for everybody else, not for myself, right? So this conditioning prevents us from sharing accomplishments or talking about all the cool things that we've done, because women don't want to be seen as boastful. And I say women, but I'm talking about people who are socialized as women, and people who are socialized also to be that way, right? So I'm not this is not a this is a typical group that is programmed that way, but there are definitely other people that are also programmed that way and conditioned that way. And it doesn't also help, right, that from the moment that girls enter school, they are completely underestimated. There was a great study done that showed that, and there's a link to it in the show notes, that showed that girls and boys did the same at math when they first entered school, but that after that, the scores began to separate, with the boys pulling ahead. In further examination, they discovered that there were actually a number of systemic issues holding the girls back. There were a lot of factors, but one of the big ones was bias against girls, that they felt that for girls to be as successful, they needed another set of characteristics as well. And they felt that there is a certain amount that girls are, we think that they thought that girls should be capable of, right? And they couldn't go higher than that. The glass ceiling, right? The glass ceiling exists in frickin' kindergarten, guys. Kindergarten, all right? Now, in some cases, there's a question about the things that you should be allowed to do, right? So, when I was growing up, there were all kinds of things that girls were not allowed to do, but only boys could do. And in this study, it became apparent that that grows well into our adult life, where in professional fields where there's a gender bias, women are less likely to contribute, they're less likely to join, so their voices are less likely to be heard. And this makes sense if you think about the fact that there are still people out there who believe that there is a way that girls are supposed to behave. Lisa Fisher, an instructor at the Final Touch Finishing School in Seattle, Washington, says, girls should be taught how to eat, talk, walk, dress, converse on the telephone, and respond to adults with respect and poise. Forget the fact that, honestly, she's talking about a telephone, right? Which is about as antiquated as her ideas. I grew up with messages like this, and almost all of us did, right? We all grew up with messages like this. And as we got older, there were other messages that consistently demonstrated that we were not measuring up to the archetype that was laid out, right? And I tried to conform so many times over the years, like in so many different ways. I bought suits and heels, I did my hair, and I wore makeup, and I behaved the way I was supposed to. But it never lasted. It was so uncomfortable, because inside I knew that there was another way that I was supposed to be doing things for myself, but I struggled because, like everyone, I wanted life to be a science, right? I wanted there to be a prescribed way to do things. And if you do things that way, you go to school, you go to college, you get a degree, you get your job, you do well, you the whole, you do things that way. If you do that, then I'll be happy and content, okay? And I won't feel like I'm constantly needing to prove myself, or that I'm enough, or constantly stave off the fear of being unhoused because I suck at everything. And that's a very real fear for me, by the way. So it's a very, very real fear for me that I just won't have a home, and that I won't be able to pay for things. And this comes from real trauma in my life, does the anxiety for us all. So whatever it is, that the story that we have in our heads, and you have in your head regarding, what you're supposed to do, what is the prescription for success, and you do that, and then you won't ever feel whatever the bad thing is that you're trying not to feel, right? Again. So I did things the prescribed way. And I would say I started doing that around 11. So when I was around 11 is when I realized that it was when everything, I vividly remember it just closing up, right? The door literally just closed. And at that moment, I would call it going into like the closet, right? Everything just went inside. And that's when I learned to hide all of my inner light, coming from everywhere. And it's not just my gender closet, it's all the closets, right? The closet of the fact that I like being crazy with blue hair, and that I say dude a lot, and just silly things, like the fact that I don't feel the need to have gravitas, right? Like I don't need to be serious all the time. It's not who I am, right? But I didn't feel safe doing that, right? And so I kind of started to put some of those things away. And I lived that way with my inner light really just until about April 2018, which is interesting to people who thought I had a light before that, right? Because they're like, oh my God, you've always been so happy and full of light and so on. And the truth is, I know I have not, right? You've only been seeing like this much because there was so much of my joy that was inside, because I did not feel like it was welcome out in the world. Because again, of the way that we are all conditioned, which is why it's so hard for us to make choices in our own best interest, because these are all the thoughts that happen. Okay. So now literally till that date, April of 2018, I molded myself in the image of what others wanted for me or of what I thought I should be. Now, some of these other people, by the way, have been dead for years. Oh my God, they've been dead for years, but their voices echo on in my mind because they were that loud, okay? And they had that much of an impact, okay? Vanessa could be so much more successful if only they applied themselves. Yes. Secret, I was applying myself. Surprise. Oh, this one was good. No one's going to want to marry you. You're old and fat now. I was 25 and I was actually the thinnest I think I've ever been in my whole life. So, oopsies. Also, I'm married now, so whatever. And also, who cares? I didn't want to get married anyway. So many things wrong with that sentence. But anyway, Stop Shitting All Over Yourself was born of the conversations that I had with other people who have these same stories, right? So I've just told you my story, right? But in my experiences over the last, I would say 5 years, I have worked with so many people, met an enormous amount of just incredibly strong women who deal with issues that so many people are just completely unaware of. They're just totally oblivious that it even exists, right? And I started to have conversations with them, and we realized that we had lived decades of our lives, decades trying to live up to expectations, and we were all so tired. We were tired of the expectations that were real or imagined. We were tired of feeling like we didn't measure up, or like no matter what choice we made to work on something in our lives, it was always the wrong choice, or there was always a better choice that we could have made that we didn't make. And so we started talking about what some of those expectations were and really started to deliberately shed them, like really talking about, okay, what is this expectation? And, they'd come up as situations came up and you'd be like, okay, what is this expectation? Let's break it down and see what it is. And it's agonizing to let go of ideas that you thought were the way things were, only to find out that like it was something that some adult in your life told you that was the way things were. And that isn't actually, there's no natural way that's making something this way. It's just somebody says this is how it is because that's how the system's set up, and systems can be changed, right? And then the more ideas we started to challenge, the more ideas came forth as challengeable. And soon it became more about asking the question, am I doing this because I think I should? Am I doing it because someone told me to? Or am I doing this because it feels like what is true and right for me in this moment? And it was beautiful to watch that in bits and pieces, we all slowly left our anchors that were holding us down behind. In the group that we had people who left abusive spouses. They sought out therapy. They found joy in ways that honestly none of us had ever even considered possible before, because we hadn't even opened our minds up to the possibility that there was something else, right? Because this is just the way things are, right? And all because we decided to live our lives, run our businesses, schedule our days, do our work in a way that works for us, right? That's it. It's just we set up systems that work with our flow and rejected the idea that we had to do it the way someone else said we had to do it, right? Nothing complicated. Simply, this is who I am, this is how I engage with the world, and this is what works for me. Sometimes, though, I'll tell you, a lot of us didn't actually know what worked for us, right? And we had to trial and error and figure it out. I certainly didn't. I had no idea. And it started by me talking to people, following influencers on Instagram, and expanding my horizons outside the bubble that I had been living in. And I'll tell you, it was really, oh my God, it was so uncomfortable. It was the most uncomfortable thing I have ever done. Even with well, okay, I can't say it's the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done, but it's definitely one of the biggest. Like the last few years have been really uncomfortable. Even talking to my therapist about it was very uncomfortable because I was really I was laying myself bare. I was just literally naked inside out, right? But over time, as each success built upon another one, and eventually life started to get better, and then I started to apply that philosophy to productivity, to time management, to relationships, and ultimately for myself, I realized I wanted to live a life of radical honesty and truth. Like that's it. Radical honesty. If you watched Star Trek, Picard, this is the Quat Malat philosophy, the way of absolute candor. Theirs is a little extra. I'm not that extra, but I want to live my life as radically honest to myself as I can, right? Because once I shed the mask that I had been carrying, I realized how heavy it was. It was so freaking heavy, right? And from the big things, like how to have a successful relationship, to the small things, like how to organize my day and my workflow and what I want to do when I first wake up in the morning, I started to seek out tools to systemize Manessa, like me, my day, my life, right? I'm systemizing me because I'm the one that has to live with me all the time. And once I shed the beliefs of all about how life was supposed to be, I have felt more empowered and have been more successful than I ever thought possible. And once you learn the way, the good news is that you can walk the path again, right? So, like, the problem with healing is that we often feel like once you know how to feel better about things, like once I decided to shed everything, that I was always going to feel good about it. No, that's absolutely not how it works. Every time I'm confronted with a new circumstance, I go through the exact same process. But the good news is that the more you do it, the more you practice, the easier it is to get out, and you know the way, right? So instead of being like, oh my God, I feel terrible about this and I don't know how to feel better about it, you know the path to feel better about it. You just have to remember that the path is there, which is often what takes the longest amount of time for me, is to remember that I have a tool. And then once you use the tool, you're pretty much good to go, right? Now, it took me a few months to work through this process, but once I did, I made my choice, I took action. And now that I've been out of independent business ownership for about 5 months now, I can see exactly why Spirit said this is the time to rest, right? And this is why trusting yourself is so important, because I trusted the Spirit, and my gut knew what was right for me. I trusted in my intuition, and I did the thing that was necessary, even though I didn't super understand why. I just knew that I needed to nest. I kept saying that to people, that I need to nest, right? And this time is actually an incubation period. And I didn't really understand that fully, but I'll tell you, since I have not been actively running a business and sort of just been like existing in the world and working on my mission, like my personal life mission, I have found that this incubation period is acting as a catalyst. The work I'm doing right now on my mission is some of the clearest work I've ever done. And the connections I'm making are so much easier. They're insane. Like, I'm telling you, they're coming out of the freaking woodwork. And I cannot help but believe that there is some cosmic alignment to this, because of the kinds of things that are happening once I trusted myself, surrendered to what I knew was right for me, and took that step despite what I thought other people would think. And that is where stop shitting all over yourself comes from. There is no one in this world that knows you better than you know yourself. And the trust that you put in yourself is going to serve you so much better than shitting all over yourself ever will. It is a slow, delicious, and beautiful process, with every single step along the way opening up a new type of euphoria. I want to invite you to join me and everyone else who is with me on this journey. You can do it with your friends, you can do it with me, you can do it on your own. Start by listening to the podcast, where I have collected some of the most brilliant minds and ideas who helped to guide me along the way to learning how to understand what my mind, body, and spirit needed, so that I could begin to fill those needs and develop this deep and loving relationship that I have now with myself. And I'm sharing this with you because there are so many people out there right now who feel the same way I did. You have something you're doing and you feel like this is your life and this is just how it is. And you're checking all the boxes that everyone told you that you were supposed to check and that you would be happy, but you're not. You still don't feel less scared. You don't feel less anxious about the future. You finally got there, and it turns out that there is just like the place you came from. And that is terrifying, because then the question becomes, okay, if that's not working, then what will? Another scary thought then is you then have to go out and create your own blueprint, right? Because there's a prescription that they've all given us that we're like, oh, follow this, you'll be happy. And then you're like, I followed it and I'm not happy. And you're like, well, shit. Where is the prescription that will make me happy, right? The blueprint of the path. But the thing is that we're all individuals and unique. And so we have to create our own path. And when I think about it, even though the blueprint other people give us might seem easier to follow because it's all written out, it doesn't always work. And it only really works for a handful of people fitting very specific criteria. So even though it is scary for you to take a chance on yourself and write your own blueprint for how you want to live your life, it's still more likely to be successful faster than one that is written for someone else that's not going to work anyway, right? And what I would recommend to get started, because this is literally what I recommend to everyone when they're like, oh my God, this resonates with me. What is my first step? Okay, your first step is this. Every day, I want you to give yourself the privilege of asking, what would bring me joy in this moment? and take action on it. There is no greater act of self-love that you can perform. Well, there might be one, but not that one. I mean, you can do that one too. Hey, maybe that's what came to mind. However, all of what we just talked about demonstrates why shutting down my business was a success and not a failure. Because the things I have realized about myself, where I have gotten to as a person, is so much further than I would have been able to get with my business where I was at that time. That is not to say that if someone runs a business, they can't move further. It's to say that where I was at in my life, this is what I needed because I had other priorities, other things going on. Someone else may have a different choice. But the key is to figure out what is going to work for you, because when you slide into the momentum of your own life and what you think is right, everything becomes easier because you're not fighting the current anymore. And you start to find that things just sort of happen a lot easier for you. It is much, much harder if you are constantly fighting the current. And the current is your inner compass that is telling you the direction to go in. And that's why I feel like shutting down my business was the greatest success that I could have had in this time, because what I needed was a break. I needed time away. I needed an incubation time. I need time to be and do other things and focus on other things. And I'm getting an enormous amount of joy from that. And that is essentially what my life's mission is to live a life of joy and fulfillment and to help others live a life of joy and fulfillment. So what I want to offer you right now is turn off this video, stop listening to the podcast, sit down with yourself for a few minutes and ask yourself the question, what would bring me joy right now? And then go do it. Live a life of joy and fulfillment. Bye-bye.